KPBS On Demand is supported by Fleet Science Center's newest exhibit, Survival of the Slowest. See firsthand how nature's smallest, slowest, and weakest creatures can not only survive, but thrive in the wild. Open May 24th through September 1st. Learn more at fleetscience.org.
Welcome back to the KPBS Cinema Junkie podcast. I'm Beth Accomando. I just survived 3 glorious, horrific days at the Horrible Imaginings Film Festival in San Diego. And I have a few things I want to share. First of all, let me offer a big congratulations to Miguel Rodriguez. He moved to a new venue this year at the Museum of Photographic Arts in Balboa Park, expanded the festival, kicked it up a notch, and delivered a great time for everyone. And he really delivered on his mission statement, which is to push the envelope on how we define the horror genre. Films ran the gamut from splattergore comedy to reflective personal narratives about real-world horrors. And kudos to the audience for being open to such a diverse range of films. And there was a decent-sized core audience who stayed for everything. I had a chance to speak with 2 young filmmakers whose work shows exciting promise and wildly different approaches to filmmaking. Erick Msumanje is a UCSD student filmmaker who comes from Tanzania, and Gigi Saul Guerrero hails from Mexico but now lives in Canada. Both had films screening at Horrible Imaginings. Erick's film, My Mother's Songs, challenges viewers with a slow pace and poetic non-linear narrative that leaves lots of time for reflection as he reveals stories of personal horror from his home country of Tanzania. Gigi, on the other hand, is enamored with extreme horror and splatter gore, and for her short, El Gigante, she served up what she calls Texas Chainsaw Massacre, but luchador style. Her production company is aptly named Lucha Gore. I spoke with both filmmakers during the very brief breaks at the horror-packed festival that screened at MOPA. This is the first year at MOPA, and it's a gorgeous theater. But the real challenge is to watch 12 hours of film with no food and only water allowed in the theater. So here are my interviews with these young filmmakers who represent the future of filmmaking.
Hi guys, my name is Erick Msumanje. I am at the Horrible Imaginings Film Festival, and I just showed my short film called My Mother's Songs.
So My Mother's Songs is not what you would conventionally call a horror film. So talk a little bit about screening your film here and how you think it is appropriate that it showed here.
First of all, I would like to thank Miguel for giving me this unique opportunity to show my film here because as a filmmaker I've always struggled to, or particularly with this film, of kind of, or rather it's been a journey to figure out, 1, which genre it fits in, and 2, which festival would accept this kind of film that doesn't quite fit a genre. So it was really exciting to show it at this festival with the new, Horror for Humanity showcase, because for me it showed that it can live in this kind of space, because just the genre of horror itself it's a lot more complex than what people usually think what horror is, and I think that's why it fits in this festival.
And explain what your film is about.
Pretty much it's a collection of stories that are situated in my home country of Tanzania, and they look at intergenerational trauma through the voices of several young women.
Again, this is a notion of not a conventional sense of horror, but it's all stories that come from the real world, and it's horrific things that are happening in the real world. So how did you want to tackle this in a film?
The way I tackled these stories is through the approach and style. It's with the image, it's with the narration, it's through the music, through the soundscape. That is how I was able to tackle the situations and experiences that are in the film. It was through the things I mentioned, and also playing with the rhythm and the pacing of the film, and playing with the shadows and use of lighting. That's how I was able to just even begin to tackle those real life experiences.
Now, we live in this kind of fast food society where everything tends to come at you very quickly, and a lot of films there's fast cutting and fast narrative, and this really challenges that. The pace of it is very slow. It doesn't announce right off the bat what kind of a film it is or where it's going. So how did you want to kind of structure this and pull the audience into the story?
Well, I think ultimately the goal wasn't about creating a traditional film that has like a beginning, middle, or an end, but rather it's more about you willing to be patient and you willing to let things unfold in front of you, whether or not you understand them, but at least if it triggers something within you. That was, I guess, I'm not sure if I answered your question, but that was the goal, I guess. Yeah.
Well, what I really loved about the film is the fact that because the pace is slower and there are moments when the images are all very still, there are pauses in the dialogue, there are moments even when there's nothing on screen at all, and you get something that's rare in movies today, which is a moment to like reflect and contemplate. Mm-hmm. And I think that was really impactful.
Thank you. Yeah. That's I think that was necessary to tell the kinds of stories that are in this film, because if it was too fast, it wouldn't have worked. If it was too slow, I don't think it would have had the same kind of impact. And that also just comes from me being out in Tanzania and filming. Originally, I was thinking of having it shot like in a really chaotic urban space, and I thought, no, this wouldn't work. It's too loud, it's too fast. It doesn't have the same kind of weight and heaviness as a lot of the locations that I shot in which were in the countryside of Tanzania. It's a place and a space where you can breathe, you can reflect. And in order to deal with those things that I dealt with, you need to be able to breathe, you need to be able to reflect. You need a space to do that in. And if it was fast or situated in a urban and chaotic environment, that wouldn't have been possible, I don't think.
It's not a conventional narrative, but there's storylines that are running through it and kind of moods that are running through it. And it slowly builds, but it's a lot of what I would call kind of intimate tales of violence. It's not this big sense. I mean, everything that's talked about feels very, very personal and intimate. So this isn't a documentary.
Right.
Not everything in it is true. So talk a little bit about the sources for these stories that are coming out in your film.
So originally, I've always wanted to shoot a film in my home country of Tanzania. I just didn't know how. And also, with that said, I didn't want to do it in a I guess, stereotypical sense of Africa. You know, typically when you watch television or you read the paper, it's always like this place of despair, this place that needs help, and I didn't want to do that. I wanted to still tell a very heavy story, but in a very different way. So with that said, these stories are actually influenced by my own personal life experience. They're also influenced by stories within my family. Originally, or what also kind of triggered the idea was me interviewing family members, and then with that, my own interests in, or also just research that looks at colonial violent histories on the African continent, but particularly East Africa and more so Tanzania. And then when you narrow that down within my own family, which is where the whole intergenerational trauma part comes in. So all of that brought this film together. And that's also why it's like fiction and nonfiction, because I took snippets of real life stories, and then I created a narrative around that. And like I said before, or I mentioned elsewhere, it's almost, I see the narrative as like a long letter. Yeah, that's how I see it, as a long letter. A letter isn't easy to write, especially like in this fast food world. You know, it takes a lot of thought You got to be willing to take risks to write a letter, even if you're not quite sure what the results are. So with this process, my mother's songs in Kiswahili, it actually when you translate that, it's Wimbo za Mama Zangu. Yeah. It was just me writing a letter, and then it turned into this film, and here we are. Yeah.
Well, and it has a real sense of poetry to it, because it's not what you would conventionally call a dramatic film, and it doesn't build to like these melodramatic or emotional climaxes, but there are moments where the description is really powerful and conjures up something that conveys a sense of what is going on. I think there's a couple of moments, but one is when in the voiceover narration, a character is saying that I took a shovel and I started to dig with the purpose of burying myself. And in that simple sentence, it really conveys a sense of such extreme sense of like hopelessness or pain that's the only thing to do. So there are moments like that where you really, very quietly, you convey these powerful images. So talk a little bit about writing some of that.
Yeah, so I guess it's not an issue, but the interesting thing that I had to do was moving back and forth between Kiswahili and English. As you know, some words in Kiswahili or English have different weights and impacts. The main goal in general about writing, or when I was writing this stuff, was how do I say the most using the least amount of words, or just narration in general. And then by saying the most, how do I show you, not tell you, show you what that is, and then have you see it, right? That was also possible with Kiswahili because it's really it's a really poetic language. Just even when you say a word, it can mean so many things, and so that's how. And it does have like a poetic format to it. That was the other part too. Was, well, how do I take something really complex like these really traumatic experiences and issues, and then bring it down, but still have the same impact. So that was the writing process. And so first I would, I know it's interesting. Sometimes I write in Swahili, then in English, then I would scratch that because it's a different feeling when you write in different languages. I don't know, like sometimes that kind of leads into like, what happens when you watch the film without subtitles? Does it have the same power? Does it have the same feeling? Does it ask more questions? Does it ask less questions? I'm not sure. The writing was also connected to shooting. Sometimes I would just shoot stuff, take the footage and then write whatever came to mind, or sometimes I would write then shoot. So it was a lot of back and forth. But it wasn't a lot of like, I wasn't writing like a short story. Sometimes it was just a word. I would go off of a word. And from that, I would really pick that word and say, okay, well, what does this word make me feel? What does this word make me think of? And then I would think about, would it make a viewer feel this way? Would it not? So yeah, it was a lot of that kind of stuff.
Now, you're a young filmmaker.
Yes.
Your film was screened at UCSD. And in talking about it, it seems like you were going through a lot of experimentation in terms of how you wanted to put it together.
Yes.
So now that it's done and you've had people react to it, how do you feel about some of the decisions you made?
That is a good question. The simplest way I can answer that question is things just kind of fit. Things just kind of worked. I'm sure other artists or creative people or just people in general experience this. There's moments in your life where things just connect and this beautiful thing happens. So I don't think I would change anything because the way it happened was just so organic and real, and it was coming from a really meaningful and deep place and a real personal place too. So I was really invested in it. But sometimes I imagine, what would have happened if maybe I had a bigger crew, because I worked with, in the film, it's non-professional actors and a non-professional crew. This gave me a lot more access to the neighborhoods. People were just a lot more invested in the storytelling. Sometimes I think about, what if this was like a traditional narrative? How would it look in that way? What if like the actors or performers had lines? What if it was daytime? What if the viewer had access to other parts of the narrative world, because the camera is very still. It's very minimal lighting. Believe it or not, in some of those shots, it's literally flashlights, because I was in these locations where there was no electricity. So I had to really improvise. Yeah. So like stuff like that. Those are the kinds of things I think about. But the narrative, the story was just, I feel like it was solid.
In terms of the reactions you've gotten from people, are they reacting in ways that you feel like they got what you were trying to say and that makes you feel satisfied with the decisions you made?
Right. Well, first of all, what's exciting for me is when I, go to like a festival like this and seeing the people that I worked with on screen, it just makes me really, really happy because, simply put, it's almost like two different worlds. So like whenever I'm in a festival or something, I call back to Tanzania and let them know that, hey, our film, your film that you worked hard on, our film is on a big screen. But like they've never been to a movie theater like that before, So that's the part that's really exciting. And then another part is it's just really awesome to I know it's magical to see an audience get to experience this kind of story, and it always reminds me of when I first went to a movie theater. I was in Tanzania, and how magical it just brings me back to that feeling, and I hope people experience that. And even though I guess my mother's songs is quote unquote, like it always brings me that magical feeling. And I think that's what movies are all about, Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you very much for speaking with me.
Thank you so much. Yeah, this was fantastic. Yes.
So, Gigi, you just took home a couple of awards. So how does that feel?
Oh, it feels so cool. It was just really cool being nominated. But I mean, awards are awards. The coolest thing is just showing your film, right? And hearing the audience react, I think is the best reward as a filmmaker. But yeah, no, I mean, an award, it does feel pretty cool. So I took home Best Director for El Gigante, and my makeup artist took Best Special Effects for El Gigante. So we're really excited.
There aren't a lot of women directing horror, and probably even fewer that are directing horror that has gore in it. So
Extreme gore.
Yeah, so how did you get into this?
Ever since a kid, gore always, I don't know, it always impacted me so much, and I liked being grossed out. I liked the thrill of watching. I mean, I'll tell you something. I really liked watching, as a kid, surgeries on TV. I watched it religiously after school. It was a thing I liked to watch. And Pokemon, I mean, it was the surgeries on TV that I would just watch as if it was episodes every day. There's just something about the gore that just, I don't know, it always made me have so many questions about how it worked. But I never expected to be a filmmaker until much later. But yeah, I think it was always there. That little weird dark side of me was always hiding.
At one of the screenings, you talked about the supernatural. Your films are not really supernatural. They are gore. But you talked about the supernatural playing a part in your life, and that really scares you to a degree, and that you don't want to make films about that. So talk a little bit about the horror you're willing to tackle in your films and kind of the things that you're not.
I think definitely as I was starting film in general, I've been finding out, and this goes for filmmakers in any genre, you find out what your filmmaker voice is. And I definitely found out that extreme gore is what I really like. But now that I've had so much experience on it, and I think about it, I mean, I would love to try something else. And supernatural, I mean, I am terrified of it. I almost don't want to fuck around with that stuff, because what if I do something realistic on the shot and then I'll get haunted like 10 minutes later on my house, right? Like, it's just a weird feeling, because I'm a huge believer in that stuff. Also coming from Mexico, that stuff is almost part of your culture, something that you grow up with your family, and stuff you believe in. So the back of my head says, do it. You should totally challenge yourself and make something supernatural that actually doesn't even have gore in it. But it terrifies me, because I think it applies so much in film that the less you show on screen, the more your imagination will haunt you, because you create your nightmares, right? You create what scares you the most. So I don't know. That's why they scare me. But I'd love to try it one day and put some of my previous experiences on screen.
Let's talk about the film that won. So describe, for people who haven't seen it yet, describe what it's about and also the future, because this is a short film, but you have some bigger plans.
Yeah, we definitely do. Well, in short words, El Gigante is pretty much Texas Chainsaw Massacre, but with a Mexican twist. Rather than Leatherface, it's a giant cannibal luchador. Basically, this family, this Mexican family that live in the border town, they capture immigrants that are crossing the border into the States. And not only do they eat them, but they use their homemade wrestling ring as their entertainment to kill them. The oldest son does all the killing, who is El Gigante, the most maniac luchador you will ever meet. And the rest, well, I can't spoil it. But yeah, the bigger plans is our short. It's been doing so well. It's been so successful internationally that we've just signed with Raven Banner Entertainment to expand into a feature. We did that at Montreal and Fantasia. And now we're going to pitch it again at Fantastic Fest at the end of the month in September. So hopefully we will find more production partners, and someone will say, take my money, and we will make this next year right away.
And you were actually represented by 2 films here. So talk about the feature that you were a part of that screened here on Friday night.
That's right. It was Mexico Bárbaro, which is basically a Mexican anthology with all legends and traditions of Mexico, but turned into horror. So what it is, it's 8 Mexican directors who came together and did different segments of different legends and traditions. My segment was Day of the Dead, because I'm a huge fan of Day of the Dead. I had to do that one. Yeah.
I don't know if you can talk about it without giving away the twist at the end, but describe a little bit about what that segment was.
Definitely. Day of the Dead, Dia de los Muertos. It basically takes place in Border Town. Everything I make is very Tex-Mex, by the way. But yeah, it takes place in Border Town, and on the night of Day of the Dead, all these women come together on that night who've been abused, raped, you name it. They come together on that night. They disguise themselves as Day of the Dead, and they take revenge on those who've abused them before. And they work at a strip club. But the rest is history. You got to watch it.
Do you think because you're a woman filmmaker that you could get away a little bit with, because the way it starts is it almost seems exploitative of the women, but you get a twist. But do you think that as a female filmmaker, you're able to kind of show some of that and maybe not get as criticized as if a male director might have done that?
You know, that's a really good question. I think it goes both ways just in general for a female filmmaker in today's industry. You will have pros and you will have cons, like it's just another obstacle you have to face. An actor didn't show up on set, it's an obstacle you're gonna have to face. So being a girl in this industry, it's just something I gotta deal with, right? There's some things I will definitely get away with, and there's some things where I'm gonna have to prove myself a little more. I've admitted to it. As for Dia de los Muertos, I think in this case it totally worked that a girl did it. I think people would have definitely taken it different maybe if a male director did it. But at the end of the day, my goal is for someone to watch my movies and not know if a chick or a guy made it. I just want them to say, wow, that director was great, without knowing if a girl did it. I don't want it to stand out, oh, I can tell that a female did that, or I can tell a dude totally did that. The girls are naked, a dude probably made that. So I just want people to like my work, for what it is. Yeah.
I believe it was at the Q&A you said that you're going to be working with Eli Roth.
Yeah, I met him in person. I was so starstruck. I had trouble saying anything to him. I couldn't believe he was right in front of me. We were talking. He invited me to his house to chat because he watched El Gigante, Day of the Dead. He watched all my shorts, and he really wanted to meet me. So basically, what he did, he really wanted my team, Luchagor and I, to make something else, to really find what my filmmaker voice is, which, you know, it really inspired me. All the advice he gave me, he pointed out things about my films that he thinks I can totally do better at. So I took what he said, and I did this latest short called Madre de Dios, which means Mother of God. And definitely this short, I feel I will shock people a lot more than the other ones. It is pretty screwed up little short. And so yeah, it was my first time really kind of talking with him and having him guide me through, you know, a new way of filmmaking. So I kind of had him inspire me in this new one. So hopefully he will like it, and hopefully we can collaborate some more. Yeah.
Now, all three of the films you've mentioned tap into, in some way or other, something that's very specifically of Mexican culture. Mm-hmm. And I'm wondering, because this came up at the panel discussion, how do you feel Catholicism has impacted you?
Well, this last short is totally all about that. It has Santa Muerte, and it's got Antichrist stuff. Like, it is crazy. But, I mean, ever since a kid, like, Virgin Mary was all over our house. We had statues of her, paintings of her. In Mexican culture, the church is a lot more graphic. It's a lot more imagery, I find, that it really stays with you. And growing up with that, I always just had those thoughts in my head. Santa Muerte was always something that haunted me when I was a kid. It's basically, it looks like Virgin Mary, but it's a skeleton face. That's scary. You go to a Mexican church and Jesus is usually fully naked in a lot of the sculptures. Like, it's a lot more grittier imagery, I find, that I think it totally inspires me for all the stuff I make. Like, it's kind of subconsciously inspiring me, you know what I mean? It's I don't try to make it as obvious, you know, when we do our films, but Mexican culture just in general is so rich that I want to just continue making shorts that have as much of it as possible.
Well, it just seems, I was raised Catholic, and
Yeah.
I have Italian and French heritage, and
Mm-hmm.
It seems like a lot of really good horror directors, you know, do have this Catholicism in their background one way or the other. And it just seems like a lot of, if you had these Bible stories read to you, there's some really graphic, horrific things that are going on, and it seems to kind of lay a foundation.
No, I totally agree. I completely agree. Yeah. No, it goes even my grandma. Like, I would always, even as simple things as I'd watch her pray religiously every single night by her little shrine by her bed. But it's just so normal in the culture that, you know, as a kid, and I left Mexico at a young age, that for me the transition was very obvious. That when I moved to Canada, there isn't that. You know, so yeah, no, I love going back to it and reflecting on it for film.
And what is making a horror film? What does that mean to you? Do you feel like you need to kind of embrace the darkness, or do you want to scare people? I mean, what about making a horror film really drives you and attracts you?
I think in general, even as myself as a fan, I mean, at the end of the day, I'm a huge fan as well, right? I think what just makes me love horror so much is you can make an audience reactive so many ways. You can have someone at the front line laughing their heads off, and someone at the very back is screaming and crying as well at what they're seeing. I just love how horror can do that to people. I don't think any genre can do that. Any other genre, I mean. Horror just makes you have so many different feelings. You go to horror festivals, and those are the best audiences, because the horror fans are so passionate. They're the most passionate fans of any fans that I've ever seen. Like, they're the fans that let you know if you suck or not. If your film is not good, they will let you know. If your film is awesome, they will cheer so much when the horrible things are happening on screen. So horror is just, it just has this rewarding feeling when you hear the audience react to it. Whether it's shocking them, grossing them out, making them faint, making so many people walk out pissed off. I've had that happen with Gigante, and I love it. I love pissing people off because it makes them talk about it. Makes them think. I think that as a filmmaker in general, the goal is that I want to make people talk about my film and remember it, whether they liked it or not. If they talked about it, then you impacted them in some way. There's so many movies you watch that you watched it and you probably forgot about it the next day. It had nothing to you. So I think if you make people talk about your film, then you're doing your job. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you very much for talking with me.
You're welcome. Sorry for the long answers. Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to the KPBS Cinema Junkie podcast from Horrible Imaginings. Tomorrow I'll post the audio from the Sunday evening panel about Edgar Ulmer's 1944 film Bluebeard. The panel featured his daughter Ariane Ulmer Sipes and his biographer Noah Eisenberg. And coming up in October, I'll have a month of horror podcasts, including one about the first film that people remember scaring them. Till our next Film Fix, I'm Beth Accomando, your resident cinema junkie. Remember to subscribe to my podcast on iTunes so you don't miss an episode. And check for reviews on Thursdays and interviews on Fridays. And if you haven't already taken a listen to my interview with Miguel Rodriguez about Horrible Imaginings, I suggest you dig back into the archives and do so now. Thanks again for listening.
KPBS On Demand is supported by Fleet Science Center's newest exhibit, Survival of the Slowest. See firsthand how nature's smallest, slowest, and weakest creatures can not only survive, but thrive in the wild. Open May 24th through September 1st. Learn more at fleetscience.org.